So reading the epic poem of Beowulf requires more than just an understanding of the storyline. An epic poem is a piece of literature, a narrative story that describes a hero's great deeds, how they conquer enemies, how they do things that ordinary people are not able to do. In terms of the Anglo-Saxon War Society, who would make up the audience for the Scop delivering this story, certain actions and scenes reinforce the values and the things they live by on a day-to-day basis. So you have to understand that, first of all, the nature of the epic hero might be offensive to a modern audience. He sounds arrogant to us. He sounds like he's ruthless. Winning is more important than anything else. But if you look at the narrative text more carefully, what you see is that how the hero fights is far more significant. What weapons does Beowulf use? What are the strategies that an Anglo-Saxon warrior employs when they go up against an enemy such as Grendel or Grendel's mama, or later on the dragon? Beowulf responds to challenges, which means he has to be challenged by people, and that was a common aspect of the Anglo-Saxon War Society. The celebrations that follow a great deed, yes, they're partly for, partying, drinking, telling stories, gift-giving, etc., but they're also a place where what you have to do to be a leader is clearly defined, redefined, reinforced in the minds of the listeners. Values such as honor, being loyal to your leader, the bond of communitas that you swore that oath to, perseverance, not giving up when things are difficult, using sense, being able to respond quickly in a crisis situation. Those were all qualities that were idealized in the leaders of that time. Dialogue is used to reinforce those qualities I just mentioned. So when a person is telling a story, the story is not just for entertainment. It's also to reinforce in the minds of the listeners what kinds of things you had to be aware of to survive in this society. There are parallels with the story of Beowulf to a modern time, and this is partly why we study it under a classic literature genre. The monster in Beowulf is a man who has declined into less than human due to his envy and his anger and his allowing his emotions to get the better of him. If you think about what our modern monsters are, it's not necessarily a bad, ugly thing in the dark. Modern monsters are things that we find it difficult to conquer, to deal with. Maybe it's something like a disease or something like war. Those would be our monsters today. Beowulf has a lot of symbolism as well. When you talk about something like Hrothgar's mead hall, it's a building, it's a structure, it promises safety and security, and it's a place where celebration happens. But it's also a group element where you have people gathering together as a community. This is not a society and a time where people existed one-on-one. It wasn't about the individual, it was about the group. So we've changed some of those things in modern society, and it tends to go back and forth. The sentence structures, and you look at the text of Beowulf, have some elements of Old English. We have something called the kenning, which is a specialized metaphor. It only occurs in Old English. Instead of saying the king, the king, the king, he's referred to as the ring giver or the treasure giver. Instead of saying the ocean, they refer to the whale road. So that is an element that you have to understand is there as the people would have expected the Scop, the person telling the story, to use those phrases. Secondly, repetition is very obvious in this text. Repetition is there in place of a chorus in a song, and it retells what happened. So you might hear the story from a warrior, and then you might hear the story from the king himself, then you might hear the story from someone who was an observer, and then maybe a visitor heard about the story and they retell it again. That is done partly so that the Scop had a fallback, so when he's telling, if he got lost or got mixed up, he could easily just invent another part to the story, or it's to make sure that the listeners understand what the most important values are.